Welcome back to the Spotlight. I'm Ed Juenka, and if you just joined us, I've had a wonderful conversation with Brother Meade Malone and Sister Lisa Nichols about MWM Entrepreneur Network business. And we are here now with Mr. Elton Georges, former Complaints Commissioner Elton Georges, former Permanent Secretary in the Chief Minister's Office, Elton Georges. Mr. Georges, you're a school teacher, Elton Georges. You are a number of things. I mean, you've done a lot of service to this country. You taught me Spanish. You taught me Spanish in secondary school.
Do you remember anything?
Yes, I remember some things. Yeah, buenos dias, buenas noches, cómo está usted? You know, that kind of stuff. I remember a couple of things. But you made a lot of contributions
well, just
to the territory.
Just in school, as you were saying, just in school and then in the public service.
Okay. Yeah. So we're here tonight. We're going to pay tribute and talk about Teacher Willard, as we affectionately know him, Teacher Willard.
And we affectionately knew him down in the admin building as Chiefy.
As Chiefy. Mm-hmm. Okay. I think he was the second chief minister.
Yes.
And the first financial secretary.
No. He was the first minister of finance. He was never financial secretary.
Okay. The first minister of finance.
Yes.
Okay. And you were permanent secretary in his ministry at that time.
In the chief minister's office. Mm-hmm. Yes. I have to begin with a disclaimer. In my opinion, from what I have learned or heard, I really think that his major contribution to the territory was in the field of education, as an educator.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because I don't see that in his bio. It seems to me that he was a person, I think, that introduced what was then a comprehensive school system.
No. The comprehensive school came in during the time of Mr. Lavity Stout in 1968.
For some reason, I thought he had done that. I mean,
what I'm speaking about is that his service as a school teacher, and school principal, and the influence he had there.
Yes.
And I believe we underrate the importance of that activity of education in the schools.
Yes. Yes.
And for the time that he was there, and what I heard he did, and I can't speak to that. That has to take others who.
Well, I was a student. I was a student when he was the principal of Major Bay School.
Yes.
And I have really interesting memories of him being there.
Right.
He used to walk. Well, the thing that stuck out most, I think, in all of his students' mind was that well-oiled leather strap that he carried rolled up in the palm of his hand. You know, he was a tall, strapping man.
Yes.
And he would walk around with this leather strap behind his back. He always walked with his hands behind his back. And he would patrol the school. You know, he never really sat in his office for any length of time. He patrolled the scholl, and if he caught you doing anything out of the way, all you would feel is a leather strap. You won't see him coming. You won't know he's there. But the discipline was worth it.
And that's meaningful. The interesting thing, as I said, and you have first-hand experience of that. But my relationship with Mr. Willard Wheatley began in 1971 when I was transferred from the high school to the Chief Minister's office. Mm-hmm. And for 2 weeks, I believe this was April 71, I understudied him because he was the administrative secretary, as it was then called, in that office to Mr. Lavity Stout, who was the chief minister, but he was going on retirement. And so I sat with him for those 2 weeks before he proceeded on retirement leave, and learned a great deal from him in those 2 weeks. Watched him in operation, and he involved me in whatever he was doing, so I could understand what the job was about.
So what kind of person he was from your experience? A calm person, energetic?
Yeah, there's no question about it. He was calm. I mean, he was somebody with great, I don't know, sort of personal dignity, a presence, a very dignified presence. He was soft-spoken, you know, and he carried himself with that dignity at all times. Always very well groomed, and someone who you know, embodied that kind of spirit of a statesman, of a leader who led by example and by his very presence. You felt that, you know, here was somebody significant. And he carried that throughout.
Any particular philosophy he espoused while in government?
Philosophy, no, that is a big word.
I mean, you know, in terms of the development of the country, whether it's in education, what was his vision for he had a vision for education. He had a vision for economic growth and development. He had a vision for social justice and so human development. I mean, did he talk about things like that?
I don't recall him sort of giving voice to grand ideas or anything of that kind. When he came into government as chief minister, and of course, you know, a very interesting political development, because here he was. He was 1 month, he was the secretary to the chief minister. He retired, he contested the election, and lo and behold, he came back as now my boss, as chief minister. And the chief minister was at that time responsible for education, as well as, you know, economic development and so on. But when he assumed that office, it was a time when the economy of the territory was going down into the doldrums. You know, economic activity was slowing down. There was unemployment was rising. There was a lot of problems and a lot of concern. So his first priority really was to try to steady, as he said, as he called it, steady the ship of state, and to get through this rather difficult economic period and steer the territory into more prosperous times and into calmer waters, which I guess he managed to do by the force of his personality, by being open to ideas from others. Those of us who worked with him, you know, found him a very pleasure to work with, because he would listen to your suggestions and to your comments and to your ideas. He was open to them. You listen to them. You see, he was taking it into account. He's taking it seriously, and out of these, from that kind of humble spirit of listening to others and hearing what they had to say, I think he was able to lead the territory back into more prosperous times.
Do you remember
as we saw later on.
Do you remember what initiatives were taken during that time to spur economic growth, or to bring additional revenue into the territory?
Well,
did he get more tourists? Did he? Because I don't know. I don't know whether financial services wasn't a pillar at that time.
It was not. We didn't have.
It was mostly tourism.
We didn't have any financial services much to speak about. It was tourism, and all of the economic activity that led to construction, the construction industry, which thrived on tourism and home building and so on, was of course a big pillar, and that is one that was suffering at the time that he took over. the initiatives that he took were that, he continued the process of inviting responsible investors in to bring in capital into the country. That was the development model that we saw that was needed, that we needed investors to come in or to remain in or to pour more investment in, to encourage locals. The Hotels Aid and the Pioneer Industries things were on the books, and those were used to encourage locals to invest also, to give them incentives to invest. And it's a number of activities. He also had to contend, I have to say, and this happened mostly while I was away in 73, 74, when Eliu Reimer took over from me, so he could tell you more if he were here, with what was called the first oil crisis. The price of petroleum went up quite substantially, drastically, and it caused enormous difficulties to everyone, especially in the BVI was no exception.
Yes. I remember going on a line in the States, long lines.
Right. And for revenue increasing measures under his watch, and I think when we have Douglas come in, because he was at that time financial secretary for some of that time, there were a number of things. There were little new innovations tried, like coin, to introduce, and coinage for collection purposes mostly, but to raise a little revenue. Under Mr. Willard Wheatley, he introduced the cruising permit. The yachting industry was expanding, and people liked to cruise the waters of the BVI, and it was realized that here was a source of revenue we weren't tapping, and the cruising permit fee was introduced to bring up substantial revenue, and he had to weather a lot of opposition to the introduction of that. People saying, oh, he's going to kill the yacht chartering industry, people are going to stop coming and go elsewhere. And this is what I said about Mr. Wheatley. If he knew he was right, he held firm. He did not, he was not easily shaken by what seemed like opposition coming from out of nowhere. And he held firm to it. It did go ahead, it was introduced, and the dust settled, and it became a very good source of revenue.
Yeah. We're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors. When we come back, we'll be joined by his son, Doug Wheatley, and we're going to talk some more about his stewardship of the country as chief minister. We're going to talk a little bit more about his contributions in education as well. Most of us from East End, I think, a lot of us from East End that came to secondary school came from under his stewardship at the school, under his principalship at the school. And when you look at the secondary school during our era, you would see many of the persons that are in leadership positions today came out of that secondary school during the time that we were there. So you all did a fantastic job back in those days. We're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors. When we come back, we'll be joined by Doug Wheatley, and of course, Mr. George will be here, and we'll continue the discussion about former Chief Minister Willard Wheatley's legacy and contributions to the Virgin Islands. Don't go away. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Spotlight is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands and CCT Global Communications.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm Edwin, and I'm here with former Complaints Commissioner Elton Georges, school teacher Elton Georges, Permanent Secretary Elton Georges, all these titles. And of course, Doug Wheatley, colleague, talk show host, and permanent secretary. Yeah. And you're a permanent secretary under with your dad as well, right?
Yes, I was with Stout first, and just for a little while with the old man.
Okay. Yeah. Well, before we get into some more of his contributions, and I had I think a great experience educationally, because I went to school, primary school, the Major B school when he was the headmaster, and Mr. Georges and I were trying to reminisce about education, and perhaps we could talk some about his educational contributions in the East End. I understand we're in the West End area as well. But before we do that, I want to talk about activities surrounding his centennial, so we could get the listening audience an opportunity to come out and share in the celebration and share in the tribute. So I know on Sunday there's an event. Any other things happening for this week? Because Thursday is going to be his birthday.
Yeah, and then there's the Rotary talk that Elton will give to Rotarians and others, I guess.
Yeah, Rotarians and get a guest.
Yeah. And then on Sunday will be the service. It starts at 3:30, and hopefully it'll be finished by about 5:30 or 6. And it should be a good little program. Different people will be speaking, and from different perspectives and so forth. Okay. So that should be good.
And that's at the Willard Wheatley.
Willard Wheatley, yeah.
Okay. And again, this Sunday coming.
Sunday the 19th.
This Sunday the 19th.
Right.
At 3 p.m. In the afternoon.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know if it's going to clash with other things. I think there are a couple of other events going on, but perhaps there's not a direct clash.
Yeah, well, I'm sure for particularly those of us in the East End landlord community who he helped, who he educated, really, because I think under his headmastership in Major B School, it was very strict. Very disciplined. The teachers were very good,
Yes.
and they made sure that we learned. I mean, I don't remember you in school. You may be a couple of years older than me.
Yeah.
But what's your recollection of Honorable Wheatley during those years?
Well, before I answer that, let me read a little bit about his time in education, just to put it in perspective.
Okay.
And I'm reading from when he first launched out, on the 3rd of May. I think it was the 3rd of May. He made his speech, and I have some of it here. So I'll just say what he said here. Following a brief sketch of the candidate's background, born 1915, son of Mr. and Mrs. Charles Wheatley, we're talking about 1971. Father is dead, mother alive at age 91, and she lived to be about 104 before she passed. Married to Dorothy Naomi Wheatley, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Claremont Davies, who are deceased. He had 4 sons, Corbett, who at the time was a senior air traffic control officer, Doug Wheatley, who was an administrative secretary in development, planning, and tourism. That was always too long when I go away to represent this long thing here. Anyhow, Nathan and Didymus, at the time they were primary school pupils. He served in educational fields as follows. He was a pupil teacher in the East End School from 1932 to 1938. He was a headmaster of Longlook School in 1939. He was headmaster of West End School between 1939 and 1942. He then moved back to East End, where he was headmaster from 1942 to about 1967. Mr. Wheatley received his Leeward Islands Teacher's Certificate in 1941. He attended the Government's Training College in Trinidad in 1949, completing a successful course as a special year student. In 1956-1957, he acted as supervising teacher in the territory of the BVI. In 1964 to 1965, he attended the University of Nottingham, England, where he completed a course in the study of theory and practice of education, together with theory and method of secondary education and the evaluation of educational TV. In 1967, of course, he moved out of education. He took a course in Jamaica where he studied operations in the Ministry of Lands and Social Services before taking over the Ministry of Natural Resources and Public Health in the British Virgin Islands as an administrative secretary, the minister's chief advisor. In 1970, he was transferred to the chief minister's office as his right-hand man, and he remained there until a young man by the name of Elton Georges then came by. Yes, so that's his background in education. And when he came back, he was always very, very keen, of course, on education. But the time that he spent in Trinidad, he was able to bring back a number of innovative ideas to the school there. And people like Teacher Silville always talk about, you know, what he did when he came back. Eliu Reimer, he went to school in the East End for a while, and he would talk about some of the innovative things he did and so forth. So education was always the thing for him, you know, to educate the young people and to, you know, get them up to a certain level. And you will recall that 7th standard, of course, was the highest grade at the time.
At the time.
And the 7th standard of that day was the equivalent, I dare say, to a college degree. Because when you came through the 7th standard, you knew all about English, you knew about maths, the 3 R's.
Yes.
And we did something which is not now done, which is mental arithmetic. I mean, if you go to a supermarket now and the current goes off, some of the people don't know how to figure out anything.
Right.
But you'll recall that we had to do a lot of mental arithmetic, do it in your head. And there are many, many persons up to today who still do that. And so it gave a foundation for education, because one of the things that we had to do analyzing of sentences, parsing and analyzing and so on, the parts of speech, the parts of a sentence and so forth. And after a while, they didn't do that anymore.
Well, yeah, I remember clearly because I refer to Teacher Linden all the time as one of those teachers under Headmaster Wheatley that made sure that we knew all the grammar of English.
Yes.
You know, all of the parts of speech, the sentence structures, the punctuation, all those things we knew, and so and we had regular reading comprehension.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so when you move off to secondary school, because then during my time, there was secondary school going on in Rotown, and you had to pass an entrance exam, an assessment test, and an entrance exam to get into the high school. And I passed, and when we went to Rotown, we were able to read, and I was reading books. You know, when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales and the Hardy Boys and all those things, and we came out of that school. So I'm a testimony to the significant contribution he made in education in what is now the Willard Wheatley Primary School, then the Major Bay School.
Yeah, the grounding was fantastic. But in addition to that, I refer to him as the Queen Bee, because he taught so many persons who later went out to teach others. And at one point, most of the schools were manned by his students.
Yes.
You know, and so that's why I call him a Queen Bee. You know, he produced all those persons. And for example, when he was teaching in West End, he taught Laverty, he taught Cyril Romney, and he taught all of the persons there in West End, Wendell Parsons, etc., etc. And when he was back at East End, and R.T. O'Neill had then come back from grammar school in St. Kitts, and he was going to be the headmaster of North Sound School, they wanted him to get proper pupillage. And so they sent him to the East End School to work with Wheatley for a period of time. And so his tentacles were spread throughout the territory of the BVI. You know,
perhaps his greatest contribution was through education. I think we don't recognize. We talk about his political contribution, but I don't think we recognize, as Mr. Jordan was saying, we don't recognize his educational contribution as so much as we do political.
Undoubtedly, everyone teach one is
Yes.
what he did. He taught his students. They came through, and then they went out to teach and carried his philosophy on and on.
Yeah. Now, with politics, what motivated him to get involved in politics? Because he didn't seem to us and to me as a young boy going to school, he didn't seem to me a politician. You know, he seemed a teacher. He seemed someone who was genuinely interested in making sure that the students learn, and that was his life. He was your teacher and your father at the same time.
Well, I would have to let Douglas answer that question. Because I would agree with you. I mean, from my brief acquaintance with him, you know, he did not look like a natural person to get into the rough and tumble of politics.
Yeah.
And yet, he did, and he succeeded.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Maybe Douglas can.
Yeah, how did he get to go into politics?
Well, I think he stumbled on it. No, he was a teacher. I mean, that was his thing, taking care, not just teaching in the school. He taught piano lessons. He taught people. Joel Stevens learned to play the piano there. Eleanor George, a number of persons came by, but he wanted to teach. That was his main thing. Of course, he and I had a little falling out about music. I'll tell you about that. We had this piano in the house, and he wanted me to learn the piano, and of course Joel and teacher Charles and everybody came and they learned to play the piano. But they had a lot more patience than I had. So I said to him that I want to play a calypso, a benna. And the Duke of Iron was popular at that time, and I loved his calypsos and so forth. So I said, well, Dad, if I will do all this pian, 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 I said, I'll do that. But at the end, let me play a calypso. And he told me, no, you can't play a benna. You have to learn, you know, your music. And I told him, no, that's not going to work. And that's why I don't play the piano today.
That was your loss.
Yeah. But he was a teacher in every aspect. Now he was very much interested in international politics. And if you remember what our society was like in those days, there were lots of visits. Alwanli, Fred, and Basil would come to the house, and they would talk about the politics, international politics, you know. Wheatley boy, you hear the Russians have gone into Hungary, into, you know, that sort of thing. So they had radios, those little pie radios and so. So he had that interest in international politics. But local politics as such, you didn't think that he would ever get into it. And really, when he was coming up on his retirement, the people from Easton, your father,
Right.
Obel Penn, and a number of other persons came to him and said, we want you to run for politics.
I call them the council of the elders.
Yes, yes. And at first, I mean, I think it was a bit of a little shock to him. They want me to run for politics. They want me to go into politics. But after a while, he got used to the idea of going in. And when the first speech he made was a very powerful speech, and I'll read a little section here, if I may. It said that his first, when he first went out, let's see if I have it here. They said the crowd, and on the following Monday the 3rd, Mr. Wheatley made his first campaign appearance at a mass rally in East End, which was reported as the largest attended political meeting the district had ever experienced. So he came out and the people supported him.
And this you must remember, in here was District 6. This was
6.
1971, because the territory then was 7 districts. And the 7th district would have been Virgin Gorda and Anegada, I think. I understand Anegada was married to Seacoast Bay at one time. But certainly Virgin Gorda, the Southern Keys, and District 6 would have been most of what's Easton and Long Loop.
Yeah.
So that was the time that he ran against TB Letson.
TB,
That's right,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
incumbent.
Yes, and won.
If you remember the first the election under the Constitution, the Ministerial Constitution of '67, the successful administration under Lavity Stout, there were 3 ministries, and the other 2 ministers were T.B. Leadsom and Ivan Dawson.
Right.
Because they were all Methodist lay preachers, they were nicknamed the Holy Three.
Yes.
And Mr. Wheatley himself, now when he came in as chief minister, he was also, he
was
had
a
been a
local
Methodist
preacher.
local preacher.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Methodist
right.
local preachers were
Yes.
carrying the day.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, he was the organist for the church for a while. He was the choir master in the church and so forth. So he just loved teaching and doing that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But politics, once he went out and he made his speeches and he got that feedback, it energized him. And then he wanted to go on and on and on. And he really felt that he could make a difference in the territory. And at the time, as Elton was pointing out, the BVI was having some challenges in 1971.
72, 73.
H.L. Stout had attempted to bring the territory out of grant in aid. I don't know if you remember that. In 1970, he had attempted that to balance the budget and so forth. But then the economy took a downturn after they stopped all the Wickamsky and Anagada projects and so forth. And so all of a sudden, we were now needing grant in aid.
Yeah, you also had the Arab oil crisis.
So that came in
that came a little later in
1973.
1973.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we were having some challenges in balancing our budget, and we needed money from the UK. And so the grant in aid, which had been started under Cruikshank in the 1950s, and which served a good purpose in the early days, was now a millstone around our necks. And
Well, let's explain for those who may not know and who are listening, is that when he says grant and aid or budgetary aid, what it means is that we were not raising enough money to meet our, what we call our recurrent expenditure, our current expenses, our operating expenses, paying salaries, renting, whatever. And so in addition to needing money for capital programs, buildings and roads and whatnot, we needed to get some money. It was never more than really 10 to 20% or 15% or so to balance our current budget. We weren't raising enough money to pay for that. But that 15% or whatever it was that we had to get from the UK enabled them to
So they had a certain
control
level
your
of
budget.
control.
So yes, to dictate to a certain extent
oh yeah,
how your budget was shaped.
And how you spend the money.
oh,
Yes.
yes. And it was like tide aid. You had to buy stuff from the UK.
That was the
Right.
other thing with,
Right.
with their capital aid, especially. They gave you money to build schools, like the comprehensive school building, what now the high school. A lot of that money was British development aid money, but you had to buy British.
You had to buy the materials from them.
So
and-
you'd
and
buy
so on.
British toilets, and then the problem is you couldn't get the parts to fix them because again,
Yeah.
they were British toilets, and
Yes.
you know.
And you're close to America.
Yeah.
Yes,
You're
so
close to
close.
America.
So the
yeah.
upkeep of what they gave you, the upkeep, the maintenance of it, in those cases, it was not sustainable, and it was a problem. But you didn't have much choice.
Yeah. All the vehicles were Land Rovers or Bedford trucks.
I remember. Yeah.
And again-
I
out of the
remember.
UK.
And
Yeah.
again, the parts, you
Yeah.
had to get them from the UK. So it was aid to help Britain as well.
Yeah. We're gonna take a break for another word from our sponsors. When we come back, we're gonna continue the discussion about grant and aid and what motivated him and how was he able to accomplish getting us off grant and aid and navigating. Mr. Judge spoke a little bit about it, but navigating through those difficult times and I'm trying to get a sense of what he thought as a man, as a leader, in terms of our economic development and our social development. Did he have a vision of what he thought the country should be like? I don't know if that was something that was communicated, but that's one of the things I never hear people talk about. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into that conversation. Keep it locked right here in the Spotlight. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Spotlight is brought to you by Tortola Concrete Limited, the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, and CCT Global Communications.
Welcome back to Spotlight. We're having a delightful conversation here with Mr. Georges and Doug Wheatley. We're talking about Honorable former Chief Minister Willard Wheatley. This is this Thursday, coming the 16th of July. He would have been 100 years old, and there's a centennial commemorative celebration going on in his honor. We heard, of course, of his honor during Territory Day, among the others. And so, we are taking this time out to pay tribute to him, because we don't hear a lot about the other leaders and other persons in our community that has made significant contribution to our development. We hear a lot about H.L. Stout, of course, but there were others as well. And so we're trying to build on that national hero status, and to get our young people in particular and old people to have a knowledge of the persons on whose shoulders we stand. And certainly Teacher Willard, as we affectionately called him, was one of those persons on whose shoulders we stand. Certainly I stood on his shoulders. And so we're having this conversation. If you want to call us, open the phones. The phone number is 499-1950. 499-1950. If you want to make a contribution to the discussion, a tribute or remembrance, we'll be happy to hear from you. So anytime you want to call, feel free. But we were talking about, of course, his foray into politics. Mm-hmm. And of course, as you were saying off air, Mr. Georges, he was called. People came and got him and said, "Listen, we want you to run," and he ran. And he ran and won in a time when perhaps we needed him the most, a time when the country was experiencing some challenges. The international community was experiencing challenges, and as you know what we say, when America sneezes, we catch pneumonia.
Cool.
Yeah. So we had gotten pneumonia somewhat because America was sneezing, and so he had to navigate through those challenges. And I wonder how, what was his thoughts at that time. And you were permanent secretary for a while then, and you were also permanent secretary. And of course, you as a son would have a closer understanding and relationship with him. And I'm wondering at that time, what was his thoughts? What was going through his head? Did he have a philosophy? Did he have a sort of a vision or something that he espoused or said that this is what the country should be like, or this is the direction we want to go in, or these are the things that we need to do?
Well, let's say many are called, but few are chosen. He was one of the chosen. Let me read to you something from the Island Sun of 1971, when he gave his opening speech, and he was then interviewed by the newspaper afterwards. So I'll just read. In an interview that followed the Monday evening rally at East End, Mr. Wheatley said that he was seeking election because he felt that the territory was at a stage where it was a duty to step forward and offer his services. It should be clear to everyone, he pointed out, that our country is faced with a most difficult situation, and we must do all that is possible in meeting these serious problems. He spoke of the need to encourage investors to encourage investors in advancing education on all levels, of the need to increase and maintain employment opportunities, and to do this, he said, we must have new money coming into the islands. The candidate also spoke of his interest in having land titles clarified to the satisfaction of the people, so that their future will be secure now and for the future. So the country had a lot of challenges. And when he came in, I don't think he came in with a particular philosophy, a particular ideology. Things were not good, and we had to do something. Mm-hmm. And all of us had to put a shoulder to the plow in order to bring the country out of what it was. Now, I can tell you that we used to have great difficulty in making payroll. And on a Friday, they would call around to the revenue departments and say, bring what you got, bring what you got, you know, so we could pay people. And it was a very, very difficult time. There was just no money at all. And he was determined that something had to be done about that. I remember, for example, they put on a tax on checks. You remember that, Elton?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 10 cents. I mean,
5 cents.
yeah. It was desperation. Desperation when you put a 5-cent tax on a check, you know. But they had to do everything, and they were looking at a lot of options. Elton, you remember that at one point they considered oil. Right?
Considered
mining oil,
well,
drilling for
drilling
oil.
for
well,
oil.
yes, and there were people approaching with schemes to
Yeah.
drill for oil or to create-
But they never,
Turn Niagara into an oil refinery or
we
something.
never found any, we just
No.
didn't explore any. The
There was
tests were done.
There were exploration, but they never showed anything promising.
And then he believed in tourism. He did a number of trips to the UK and to Europe. I think he was instrumental in getting some of the Norwegians to come and build in Peter Island and over in Virgin Gorda and so forth. And while he was in Scandinavia, he got exposed to like mini cruise ships and talked about small cruise ships coming into Rhode Harbor and that sort of thing. So he was forever looking at options to lift the country out. But one of the things, he never wanted the country to go faster than the people could adapt to the new changes. And so if you're looking for a philosophy that was espoused at this point, I'll call it gradualism. He didn't want to see super rapid growth and development that would transform the territory overnight, because that would make people very unsettled if, you know, I mean, you know, your favorite things. That
Let
you
me
did
say
is
that
no
his
longer there.
that of course his deputy chief minister in the first term and his cousin, I think, Conrad Maduro, Conrad Maduro, would also have been an influence in that way with him, because I think Mr. Maduro also espoused this matter of not letting development run ahead, too far ahead of the people.
Oh, okay.
And so that was one of the influences on him, because, as you know, Mr. Wheatley he ran as an independent in his first in 1971, but then he formed a coalition with the United Party, which had 3 of the 7 seats, and so they formed this majority of
No, I think it was
one.
the Democratic Party.
I beg your
It was
pardon?
the Democratic Party. Dr. Osborne. Was it not?
Well, if it was, then Dr. Osborne was in the. Well, Dr. Osborne was in. Oh yes.
Yes.
But Mr. Maduro was there.
Yes. Well, Maduro came in after he fired Dr. Osborne.
Ah,
Yeah,
yes.
That's
you're
what
right.
happened
Yes,
there.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
I was getting mixed up. That is true.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah.
And Maduro.
So they both had that similar concern about development, that the development of the country would match the development of the people.
Yeah.
That's right.
Or the people would match the development of the country.
Yes. Yes.
But one of the things I said about Mr. Wheatley in my tribute to is that he was a person with an orderly mind, and he believed in planning. And under his leadership in the 8 years that he was chief minister, I remember we invested a lot in planning, in development planning, in bringing in United Nations and
UNDP.
other experts to help us to make up, to compile physical development plans, economic development plans. And he supported those all the way. Unfortunately, by the time that these plans were to the stage of becoming a draft, that they needed to be then adopted by the Executive Council in the late 70s, at some point the government changed. I think 79 the government changed. And those plans remained as drafts. They were great works. And I remember in Mr. Wheatley's last term, there was an advisory committee under the chairmanship of Macwelling Tubman of the great and good men and women of the territory were put on it to advise on how the plans that were developed by these technocrats, both those who came in and the local ones, should be finalized in order to meet the aspirations of the people of the BVI. And so all of that was done, and a lot of work was done in bringing those plans to drafts. And in the government records, if you can find them, you will find some great work down there, but unfortunately they never were adopted by the executive council of the day.
That's interesting, because I remember when I came home in 1995, we were going through a planning process, and we had I think the NIDS.
That's right.
The National
Yes.
Integrated Development Strategy.
That's right.
We had did that come out from that far back, or
No, that was a new
that was a new development,
a new
planning
initiative.
a new initiative.
But it had those.
It had the earmarks of what
drafts there.
it had the earmarks of
to
what he
use,
was
yeah.
trying to do in those documents. Yeah.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, when Mr. Cudmore, Governor Cudmore, was leaving in 1974, and he came in 1971, and his term here was a very difficult one, if you remember, Elton, with demonstrations and so. But and he was a very strict man. But when he was leaving, he was interviewed, and he said that a good foundation had been laid during those 4 years, and that they would serve the BVI well into the future. And of course he left in 1974, and Walter Wallace came, and when he was leaving, he also said that a good foundation had been built, and it involved some of what Elton was saying. A number of the administrative infrastructure was being put in place and so forth for further growth.
But what's
future.
interesting to me about what you just said, Mr. George, is now when we look at the development now and our plans now, I think we see a similar thoughts going into the plan, and that gradualism remained in the psyche of the people until this very day. You hear people asking the question, who are we developing for? The countries are moving faster than the people. You hear those sayings even in this election and elections before. People, that whole concept of what you're calling gradualism,
Gradualism, yeah.
Doug, seems to have taken a hold of our psyche, and we continue to hold on to that. So that is, I think, a very important and significant development. Now, we have a few minutes remaining, and I want to talk a little bit about the grant in aid and how we got off that. What happened? How did that procedure work? How did we manage to get to the point where we got that economic or that financial autonomy?
Well, he continued to work. He made a lot of trips abroad, as I said, to Europe and so forth, and he was able to get investors to come in. They started priming the pump, as it were, putting money into the economy, and gradually the economy started to come back. And of course, the OPEC problem and the fuel problem was subsiding and so forth. And so gradually things were coming back to normal. But it was a lot of hard work and determination at the time. There were some austerity measures, that we had to undergo and so forth. But he always believed that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. You remember, Elton, that was his favorite phrase. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that things would get better. All we had to do is stay the course and believe in ourselves that these things would happen.
Did he think of independence at all, or working towards greater autonomy? Were those things in his mind? Because getting off grant and aid sort of, lends itself to the belief that we wanted more freedom as a people.
Elton is shaking his head in the negative.
That's not my recollection. That was not a preoccupation of his.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
But yeah, go on.
The getting off grant and aid, it was a matter of dignity, although some people talk about independence in those terms too. But it was really very undignified to have your budget, pulled to pieces by people in Barbados, the British office in Barbados and in London. And sometimes they would come visit from Barbados to sit with you and go over things. It was a matter of dignity as well as to get, more control over your policies and what you could do to help people. But it was not, I think, an independence agenda in that way with him.
Well, I would say it was not independence per se, but if you look at some of the developments that were taking place, I think some people might have been a little alarmed. And one such person was R.T. O'Neill. In 1974, 73, there was a constitutional commission that came out, the Deverill Commission came out, and their recommendations were very good. Very forward-looking and so forth. But the Wheatley administration did not accept all of the recommendations. And what they did as a government, they produced their own set of recommendations. And I think you have to remember that the ministers were Wheatley, Conrad, Sills, and they had a backbencher and so on.
Mr. Henley.
Yes, until he passed away and so on. But so some of their proposals, if you read them now, you would see it was heading, I think, towards a kind of more independent approach. And I think
greater autonomy.
Greater autonomy. But I think it alarmed R.T. O'Neill. And so during the 8th legislature, which started in 1975 to 1979, R.T. O'Neill moved a motion, saying that before you could take the country into independence, you had to have a referendum. And that's where the whole referendum thing came in. R.T. is who did that in 1976, because I think he felt a little alarmed about the degree of autonomy
that they were seeking.
Yeah, and also you have to recall that during that first period in 1973, when Governor Cudmore changed the sentencing, commuted the sentence from death to life imprisonment for that young man, right? The people went crazy, if you remember that.
That was
Edwin. It was Edwin.
Dennis Edwin. Yeah, the people went crazy, right?
Not as crazy as they went
in
later
78,
in Mr. Wallace's time.
But I want to make a point about it. So they went crazy. And one of the things they said was that, well, they did a petition. They sent a petition to London. And one of the requirements in the petition was to get rid of the governor. Get rid of the governor because he's not doing what we want him to do. He had gone against what the Executive Council had advised. And so they said they wanted greater autonomy. The governor had too much power. And it was because of that that you had the Deverill report. The British government sent the Deverill report, the Deverill Commission down to inquire whether or not people were interested in independence. So there was talk of independence at that time. At that time. And they were also talking about a local governor or a West Indian governor. And the British government responded and said, you have gone as far as you can go in terms of your autonomy now. If you want to go any further than that, you will have to have full internal self-government, and that is a prelude to independence. So the British government was saying, hold your horses right there, because if you want anything more, then it's independence that you're heading to.
Okay. Now, the grant and aid, how did the British react to the desire for us to manage our own financial affairs?
I think they accepted it. They accepted it. They didn't resist at all. they were very happy. When my father returned from the UK with that news, he gave a speech and he used some of the words that Winston Churchill had used in the Second World War. He said, "This is our finest hour." When we came out of Grantinade, this is our finest hour. Yeah. But I'll tell you that I worked in finance, and Elton didn't mention it, but I'm sure he's aware of it. We had a financial advisor,
Oh, yes.
a lady by the name of Miss Tyrrell,
Miss Jones
sitting in the finance office looking over our shoulders.
Yes.
Telling you how to spend the money.
I'm telling you. Yeah.
But I think that you know, she might have been very instrumental in the getting out of grant and aid process, because she was a professional finance person. So, you know, somebody accustomed to looking at where the pennies were going and how they were, and keeping track of it. That was the important role that she played. And I think that Mr. Wheatley was, as I said, he was also a naturally cautious person. He was never one for going on spending sprees. He would watch the pennies too.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And so I think that, you know, they didn't get along too badly after all. And when Miss Tyrrell left, she cried.
He was responsible for building the reserves.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
but
there were no reserves built. He was trying to getting us balanced, get out of grant and aid.
and having
then
a sur-
after
and
that,
having a surplus.
Then after that, you started
And the
to
surplus.
build
Yeah.
the
We
surplus.
found out at the clock.
Yeah. But let me just say this.
Yes.
When Miss Tyrrell first came out, they wanted her to sit in the office of the financial secretary. I mean the physical office of the financial secretary.
It was Mr. Rumney.
Mr. Rumney. And Mr. Rumney objected. He said, "No, I will get an office for you somewhere else." But they actually wanted her in his office.
They wanted her watching
Watching it.
and listening to him.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, listen, it was great to have you. We're on the 10 o'clock. This Sunday coming, the 19th of July, we're inviting everyone to come out to the Willard Wheatley Primary School, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's going to be a tributary program to former Chief Minister, former Headmaster, Honorable Willard Wheatley. And of course, we like everybody to come out and celebrate what would have been the 100th birthday, his 100th birthday on July the 16th.
16.
Yes. Doug?
And on Friday evening to listen to you.
Yes.
And Friday evening to listen to
ZBVI.
the Doug on ZBVI. That's
3D show
the 3D show, yes, the
8?
3D show.
at 8 to 9.
At 8 and 9:30.
I'll probably
yes.
try to go to 10. if
On-
they-
That's
if
Friday.
they
That's
like
Friday night at 8 and 9:30
Yeah.
on ZBVI. Tune in to hear more of the centennial celebrations and the tribute to Teacher Willard. Mr. George, it's good to see you. You know, Mr. George taught me Spanish in high school.
it. Si hablan español?
Poquito. Poquito.
I don't even know to say poquito. Yeah, so I was reminding him about that. So it's good of you to stop by and to bring this wealth of history and knowledge, because I think it's important for us to begin to learn these things, learn on how we got to where we are and on whose shoulders we stand, because I think we take a lot of things, perhaps too many things for granted here in the Virgin Islands. Thank you guys for being on Spotlight.
Well, yes, as I did say in my tribute at the funeral, Mr. Wheatley's legacy awaits his adequate historian and chronicler.
Yes.
It needs to be written down,
Yes.
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 and
yes.
well researched and written down.
Yeah, but hopefully coming out of this compilation, we would get a good recording of it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. The next spotlight will shine on the Junior Miss BVI pageant that was formerly the Eastern Long Look Festival pageant, along with the Prince and Princess contestants. So be sure to tune in to Spotlight next Tuesday evening. Spotlight, of course, is seen Tuesdays at 2:30 p.m. here on JTV Channel 55, and rebroadcast Tuesdays at 8 p.m. and rebroadcast on Sundays at 2:30 p.m. Watch Spotlight on demand at jtvlive.net and like our Facebook page. Participate in discussions on issues coming from a Spotlight. Find out about guests coming up and Suggest your own guests and your own topics. I'm Edjuenka, reminding you that when the spotlight is on, you see the facts. Peace and blessings.
Spotlight is brought to you by Tortola Concrete Limited, the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, and CCT Global Communications.